Great. So welcome everybody to our third meeting for contractors and rulemaking. Like all of our previous meetings, I'm going to call two roles. So the first role will be for committee members and alternates of committee members. If when your name is called, you could just unmute yourself and say here so that we can make sure your microphone is working. That would be great. And the second roll call will be of ACUS members that are not on the committee that are here. So we'll go ahead and start with the first roll. Carrie Colanisi.
Present.
Great, thank you. Alona Cohen.
Here.
Great, thank you. Peter Constantine.
Good afternoon, here. Thanks.
Thank you. Curdy Dotla.
Here.
Thank you. Sally Katzen. Not yet. Okay. Katya Krutel. Can see you yet. Debbie Murphy, alternate for Daniel Liebman.
Here.
Thank you. Jerry Mashaw.
Here.
Great, thank you. Elena Ness, alternate for Rebecca Orban.
Here.
Great, thank you. Nick Perillo.
Here.
Thank you. Mitchell Plave. Okay. David Pritzker. Bertrell Ross.
Here.
Thank you. Noel Green, alternate for Helen Saracio. Okay. Lon Smith.
I'm here.
Thank you. Kevin Stack.
Here.
Thank you. Thomas Sussman. Not here yet. Daniel Weiss.
Here.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Daniel. Miriam Vincent. Will be arriving late, I suspect. Okay, so that is there. Are there any members of the Committee on Rulemaking that are present whose name I did not call?
You may have called it, but I just arrived. David.
I got you, David. Thank you.
I was a couple minutes late. This is Katya Krutel.
Perfect. I got you too. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else on the Committee on Rulemaking whose name I did not call or did not hear their name?
This is Sarah Beardsley. I'm an alternate for Elizabeth Dickinson.
Yes. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks.
Okay. So I will now call our consultants and members of ACUS who are not on the committee for roll. Bridget Dooling, I know, could not attend, so I just wanted to make sure that you're all aware of that. Rachel Potter.
Here.
Great, thank you. Amy Bunk.
Here.
Great, thank you. Jim Tozy.
Here.
Thank you. Jeff Lebers, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Perfect, great, you got my link. Okay. Are there any other ACUS members not on the committee whose names I did not call that are in attendance? Nope. Okay, great. I will turn it over to Carrie.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everyone to meeting number 3 of the Committee of Rulemaking. Contractors in Rulemaking is the proposal before us. I'm Carrie Colanisi, the chair of the committee, and as always, please note that only ACUS members, and that includes government members, public members, senior fellows, liaison representatives, and special counsels, whether or not you're on the committee or your designated alternates, of course, whether you're not on the committee or not, have full speaking privileges. Would ask everyone to keep your mics muted until it's time to speak. Please use your Zoom hand raise function to be put into the queue, or if you can't get that to work, you can add a comment in the chat indicating you'd like to speak. Once I call on you, then unmute and remute yourself when you're finished speaking. Please, ACUS members or designated alternates, if you can, at all possible, please use your webcam. Keep that turned on to facilitate our interaction. If there are attendees other than ACUS members and alternates, but it doesn't sound like that's the case, then they can participate at the unanimous consent of committee members, and time permitting, I'll call on them at such a point and presume that committee members consent absent someone raising an objection. Again, for any non-ACUS member, use the Zoom hand raise function and deal with the muting and unmuting as with the members. For everyone, please use the chat feature only to use the chat feature only to indicate if you'd like to speak, or if we get to a vote, which I'm hopeful we will today, maybe even rather soon. You can use the chat for that if you're not able to use the Zoom raise hand function. Please don't put sidebar discussions or substantive comments in the chat feature. Just raise your hand and we'll ask you to contribute those for everybody to hear. When it comes to voting, only members of the Rulemaking Committee will have a vote. So keep that in mind. If you're unsure whether you're on the committee, let us know and we'll let you know that. Okay, with all of those preliminaries out of the way, we will get started. We have circulated the draft of the recommendation with the changes that were made based upon our discussion as of the last meeting. Those are incorporated in what was circulated. And on top of it, there were some tracked changes recommended by the staff and recommended by me. Mostly those are, I think, ones that probably could be characterized as matters of style, but we wanted everybody to be able to see what changes we might recommend, and we can take up those here in a moment first. And then, of course, we'll take up any other suggestions that anybody may have on this set of recommendations before we proceed to a possible vote on these today. Before we get underway, though, as always, I just wanted to invite anyone, if you have a general comment or question about where we're at as a committee in terms of our process, or anything as of a general nature with respect to the possible recommendation we're going to put forward, please feel free to raise your hand now. Otherwise, I'd like to just sort of start in on the suggested minor amendments or corrections that are tracked in the version that was circulated. Seeing no hands raised, Kasia, if you're able to display the version that's circulated with the tracked changes, what I'd like to do is just proceed through these sequentially and ask if anybody has any comments or objections to the changes that are reflected. If so, please speak up. Otherwise, I think we will just incorporate those into the document, and then we'll open it up for any other suggested changes, additions, edits, and so forth, if anybody has any. So let's just take page 1. There's just one small change with a supra note. I'm assuming there will be no objections to that. Hearing none, please go ahead and incorporate that. And then we'll turn to page 2 and the changes that are reflected in the first paragraph there. Anybody have any comments or concerns there? If seeing none, let's just deem all of those then incorporated into the proposed recommendation. And we'll turn then to what is in the second full paragraph starting at line 30. Again, largely in minor form. We'll incorporate into this also the additional footnote of number 5. Okay, seeing no objections, questions, or concerns about any of these changes, let's deem those incorporated. Then turn to page 3, the last paragraph of the preamble. Any objections, questions, or concerns there? Seeing none, let's deem those having been accepted. There's a small change with the addition of a comma on line 51. I assume nothing objectionable there. Please deem that accepted. And then we move to page 4, just a grammatical issue on line 65. And then also a word change on line 76. Any questions, concerns there? Lon?
Yes, I think we changed it to 2 answer questions on the line 65. I think it has to be in line 66 and be responsible.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions, including now the helpful edit from Lon on 66? Hearing none, then the changes reflected on 65 and 66, please accept those. And then line 75. Hearing no objections, let's incorporate that. And then we go down to the bottom. Lines 87 and 88, any questions, comments? Then go ahead and incorporate those. Next page, then line 95 now. What is, or was line 97 on the draft that circulated? Hearing no objections, seeing no hands raised, please incorporate that. And then I think all of those changes then that the staff and chair recommended are now deemed incorporated. Are there other specific changes, edits, questions that anyone has about the preamble or any of the recommendations? Please raise your hand. Lon.
I just want to be clear on, I think it's still line 106.
Okay.
It says agencies should ensure their agreements with contractors will allow them. Them refers to the agencies, correct? Not the contractors.
Right. We could clarify that if you allow the agencies.
Yeah, that would. I just, if everybody understands it then means the agencies, then don't bother. But
But
I
if
just,
there's any question, anybody have any comments or questions, particularly on that? Kevin, you're on something else? Okay, then why don't we change that then, incorporate that change? And Kevin, you're next.
Great. Thanks, Carrie, and to all the work that's gone into this. I had one, I apologize, I was not able to make the last meeting because of teaching conflicts. I had one thought, I'm happy to be told this doesn't fit here, but it was one sort of more, a little bit more general concern or question, which is one seems like one dynamic of repeated reliance on contractors is possibly the hollowing out of agency capacities to do the jobs themselves or to carefully and effectively monitor the agencies. Let's just call this the sort of hollowing out concern. And I was wondering whether there would be a place, I was thinking about whether there'd be a place anywhere in the recommendation to sort of signal that concern. And the best place I imagined was maybe the very end, where there's recommendations to OMB. So something along the lines of, this is just rough, but OMB should also consider evaluating the effects of repeated reliance on contractors on agencies' in-house capacities, or something like that. So I'm happy to be told that this doesn't fit in the recommendation, but it seems like a concern that some might have. Certainly, I think I share the concern, so I just wanted to voice it now. And I think probably it would be a separate, it may be joined with 10, or it could be a separate 11. I don't think that matters that much. And so I said,
Can you repeat
Sure, yeah.
it for Kasia's sake?
Yeah, OMB should also consider evaluating the effects of repeated reliance on contractors on agencies' in-house capacities.
Okay, any questions or comments about? Is it Peter?
It is, yes. And I apologize for the background noise. I have some work being done at my house. I just want to make sure, the point, Kevin, being, would you be concerned that agencies would lose career staff because of the reliance on contractors? Is there a concern of losing expertise? The word hollowing out, I'm just, I don't know if we want to change some of the wording in terms of capacity. Is a concern really that the agencies maintain, I don't know how y'all can say it more artfully than me, but it can maintain, career staff with the expertise to perform functions as necessary in this area. I'm not sure I'd worry about, agencies giving up staff in place of contractors, but it certainly could be a concern, but it's also that skill set that could be lost. So maybe we just put that point on it. Thanks.
Are you suggesting, Peter, adding something to the end of this sentence? So after capacities, in-house capacities to do something?
I would say, yeah. And again, I defer to others who say it more artfully, but it could be in-house capacities in order to maintain necessary career staff with appropriate skills. Because I think the point is you want to make sure you've got the necessary, and I think putting in career staff is important. That you want to maintain necessary career staff with the necessary skills to perform in this area, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And others
Okay.
probably can wordsmith better. Kevin, does that kind of fleshes out, I think, what your point is, and I think it's a good one.
I will say that to some extent, the spirit of the entire recommendation probably speaks to this in that it's flagging with some caution for agencies when they use contractors, and there is a paragraph, or part of a paragraph at least, at the end of the preamble that suggests alternatives to relying on contractors. But that's not speaking exactly to conducting some kind of evaluation of the effects of repeated reliance. Are there any other comments about what is on your screen on lines 113 to 115? Lon?
Can you hear me all right?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. It's an interesting point, but how would OMB do that evaluation? Are they going to survey the various agencies? Do you think you've retained expertise? And how would they be able to evaluate that?
Fair question. We asking the impossible.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Kevin or Peter, do you want to weigh in on that?
I'm happy to. I wondered that too, Lon, being a ham and egg with the Department of Labor. And I think you could just look at, it goes to workforce and succession planning, have staffs who work on rulemaking, decreased over time. I think OMB could, request some general information just on the employees who are performing work in that area, the skill set. And I wasn't sure if it's OMB and or OPM, probably OMB, but I think they could gather some information to get a sense of that. I think there's collectible data there.
Kevin,
This
did you
is
want
Matt.
to?
If I may carry on this point. I mean,
Yeah, please go ahead.
this strikes me as kind of could be bread and butter OMB work through its program offices. Wouldn't necessarily have to be across all agencies at once, but program by program. So I don't think it's at all unusual. I don't think there's anything unusual or inappropriate about asking OMB to undertake this oversight function.
In some ways, I would think it would be almost implicit if OMB were to follow the recommendations in lines 107 to 113. I mean, the best way to figure out whether what guidance is needed is to figure out what agencies are doing. And as we know, our consultant report, is illuminating as it is, comes along with a caveat that it doesn't really speak to some generalities or some trends, whether within specific agencies or even across the federal government. So that kind of work would be, I think, almost perhaps implicit. Jerry, you're next.
Yes, I just had a question about why, given that this is a very general consideration, it's targeted at OMB. It seems to me something that agencies should be considering equally. And I wonder whether it's something that we shouldn't insert somewhere in the preamble rather than attaching it to 10.
And if we were to do that in the preamble, any suggestions on places, perhaps where toward the end of the second to the final last paragraph could be possible. I suppose I'm open to other suggestions, but maybe between the first and second paragraph of that, agencies will need to consider the practical benefits and challenges of using a contract. Agencies should consider, the possible effects of repeated reliance on contractors in terms of in-house capacities. So, as that's a possibility. I don't know, Jerry, if you had other specific recommendations on where something like that could go if it were to go in the preamble.
No, Gary, that looks like a good place to me, actually.
Okay. All right. So, and that would then make it a little bit clearer that it's not just a task for OMB, but for all agencies to consider. Okay. So I don't know, maybe Kazi, you could just put a little bracket just so everybody can see on line 41 where that could possibly be. I wouldn't move it yet. I'm not suggesting we do that unless others agree with Jerry, but you could just insert a little something bracket there and just say possible addition there, so people could at least see.
Was it after the first sentence or the second?
Yeah,
sentence?
after the first sentence.
Perfect.
Okay, next in the queue, I have Jim Tozy.
Yes, I would like to second Jerry's recommendation. The issue that you bring up is very known to OMB for years. And, the problem is politically, they have to keep a lid on total employment. On the other hand, the agencies have increasing amount of work. And unfortunately, the only way you can get that done then under those circumstances is through contractors. And so I think Jerry's emphasis saying this is a problem that is beyond OMB, I agree with. However, the other question is, and maybe it's beyond this report, once you raise a question, is there any suggestions of how you get out of that box? I mean, because agencies, I know agencies that I've been with that I think there are as many or more contractors than are federal employees. I go to meetings, you can't tell the difference between them. They act the same, and they have all types of different jobs. So I think raising a question is very good, and I agree with Jerry. But at the same time, it's a lot broader than OMB. But the agencies have a really difficult problem, and they have not found out over 3 or 4 decades that I've followed them a solution to that problem.
Okay, Rachel, you're next in the queue.
I'm going to let Steph go ahead of me. I'd like to hear what OMB has to say on this one.
I'm sorry to be joining late, and I'm sorry also that I have to jump off in a few minutes. I'll be rejoining later when I'm able at 3 p.m. after a 2:30 meeting. This recommendation really gives me some pause, in part because this isn't something OMB would ordinarily do. It's not that I'm troubled by the suggestion that this should be done. I think it is a good idea for someone to take a look at, what repeated reliance on contractors does for agencies, but OIRA certainly within OMB doesn't have the capacity to do this type of evaluation. And I worry about the relationship that we would have with the agency if we were doing this sort of audit of their staffing procedures and evaluating whether or not their staff had the appropriate skills relative to contractors. I think it would just put us as an institution in a little bit of an awkward position vis-a-vis the agencies with whom we need to maintain a good and collaborative relationship. And so I appreciate that it's a should consider, and certainly we'd be willing to do it, but I would need to take this over to our personnel management team to see if this is something in their wheelhouse or that they would feel comfortable pursuing. I think at least from my component's perspective, it's not something that we would really be able to implement.
Okay, appreciate that input. Rachel, do you want to weigh in now?
Sure. I was just going to say, I think the spirit of this is absolutely on point to a lot of what we learned in the report, which is that some agencies really feel like they've lost capacity and would love to have FTEs do this work, but for lots of different reasons, that's not the outcome they're seeing. So I wondered if agencies in their workforce planning might start to take this into account at a higher level. And so I like the idea of agencies having that responsibility for themselves. So I just wanted to sort of second that suggestion that it maybe if we're going to have this in the recommendation, that it might be on the agency's shoulders. That doesn't get to Kevin's point that this is sort of a government-wide problem. And so I'm sympathetic to staff's point about where would this fall within OMB. Do they really have the manpower themselves to take on this problem? So I just wanted to raise those points and let others kind of ponder on that.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Matt.
Let me just put aside for a second Steph's comment. Actually, when I was thinking of the suggestion that OMB play a role here, I wasn't thinking of OIRA, I was thinking of OMB. I don't know distinguish, but in any event, I think Jerry Mishaw's suggestion is very good here. This is just a technical point here on maybe which Reeve can speak, but if there's going to be a statement to the effect that agencies should also consider evaluating the effects, that really is a recommendation and should be written as a standalone recommendation rather than inserted into the preamble, especially if that particular language should also consider is employed.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add other than to sort of reemphasize that last point. But if it says should or should consider, then we'll definitely get a rejection if it's not the actual recommendation language, or if it's in the preamble rather than the recommendation.
I suppose that what we do here, what the committee does, depends on where the committee lands on this larger question.
And I do have to jump in a moment, but I wanted to add another suggestion just to put out as food for thought. I have seen some interesting work from agencies and their learning agendas, examining their personnel capacity in particular areas of interest for their learning agendas, which often include related to regulatory areas. And so just throwing out there as a potential place where agencies could take a look at their in-house capacities with respect to regulatory functions. And I'll join again later when I'm able to. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. What if now, so I guess we've got two possibilities up here. Matt almost is suggesting a third as well. We could address Matt's concern by just how we phrase what goes into the preamble. In fact, it could even be restructuring the sentence a little bit. It could be something that agencies that repeatedly rely on contractors may wish to, may consider, how that would affect their ability to maintain staff in the future, something along those lines. I mean, so that's a possibility that would address Matt's concern or point. Sally?
This may not be at all helpful, and I'm very late to the game, but this is not a problem that the agencies can solve themselves or that OMB can solve. I think it should be readily apparent to all of us that for the last 2 decades, regulatory agencies have generally been flatlined or decreasing budgetary constraints while being given additional responsibilities to carry out. And we've seen increasingly an inability of the agencies to do that. And the response is going to be mixed. Those who are in favor of regulation will say, well, for God's sakes, give them more money. And that's Capitol Hill. Maybe it's OMB in asking for it, but it's still Capitol Hill in granting it. And then the other side is, we don't need any more regulations. Let's keep starving these people. And maybe, what was it, Grover Norquist said, we can flush them down the drain if they get small enough. This is a political question. And I think our discussion of it that I have heard so far is unrealistic. I don't know what I would recommend here, but I don't see ACUS saying, well, gee, someone should do something about it when OMB does not have the capacity, and B, the agencies don't have the financial resources. At least that's my view.
Would it be your view, Sally, also that if an agency were to do this kind of evaluation, or OMB, then just to maybe rephrase this, that even if they did that, there's nothing that they could really do to act on it? Is that part of your point?
Yeah, I mean, what are they going to do?
Okay.
Except stop doing rules or do fewer rules. And that's losing for winning, or the other way around. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Kevin, back to you now.
Sure. This has been really interesting dialogue. I guess I take, although it is, I think it is a government-wide problem. I think putting it in the agency domain makes sense if it's to remain in the recommendation or some part of it. So either in the preamble, it could also go as a standalone recommendation under 5. I guess I think that there's some defense, even though it is a larger question. I could imagine a scenario where there's a more local concern, which is if we continue to use the contractor in this specific way repeatedly, how much capacity are we going to have to really engage them? So there is a macro concern, as Sally's pointing out. I can imagine there's also some mode of more local evaluation of whether these kind of what repeat reliance does in the agency. So I guess I'm an advocate of still keeping it somewhere. I think maybe soften language in the preamble or as recommendation 5.
Okay, so I take it then, at least you're no longer advancing an addition to recommendation 10. Or not
Yeah.
prepared to push for that, but
That's right. Given Steph's comments about OMB capacity and the need to go back and forth, then I thought, well, it seems like, yeah, that's right.
okay. All right, so are there other comments about whether this should be in now recommendation 5 toward the end? Maybe we could move that there, Kasia, just so people could see that. Alternatively, in the preamble, that's another option that's been put forward. Or I take Sally's point might be, and Sally, correct me if I'm mischaracterizing, would be that, you know, as important of a concern as this might be, it's not really something that belongs in this recommendation, either the preamble or.
Sorry, Carrie, just
yeah,
for
Kevin.
context, I meant to say as a new number 5, which would follow the prior number 4. So beginning
Okay.
around what would be 78. Sorry for.
Okay, good. All right. We can, for now, consider that something like that. Okay, Jerry, you're next.
But it wouldn't be in the ethics, it would be in the previous section.
Right. I think that's right.
So Carrie, my suggestion is that maybe trying to combine your and Matt's and others' points, we could leave it in the preamble, but not word it like a recommendation, so that that sentence could say something like, those considerations might include, and then repeated use would might affect agency capacity.
Okay. Consideration, those considerations might include evaluating how repeated reliance on contractors might affect agencies' in-house capacities to maintain necessary career staff with appropriate skills. Is that, how does that look to you, Jerry? Is that what you had in mind?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Kevin, you have your hand up still. Do you want to comment on that? No. Okay.
I was wondering whether the first recommendation might be softened a little bit for the benefit of agencies that don't use contractors for anything involving rulemaking, and might find that putting something up on the website about the use of contractors in rulemaking might spark controversy that need not be sparked because they're not using any.
And is that a point in favor of not including this at all, or putting it in the preamble as opposed to a separate recommendation?
I had in mind just softening the recommendation.
Softening the recommendation. Okay. It's already saying should consider. Any other ways of softening? You know, repeated reliance, if any.
The version I'm looking at says should adopt and publish, not should consider.
Oh, okay. Are you looking at a different, Deborah, are you talking about a different recommendation about what publishing something on the website?
No, I'm sorry, I'm talking about recommendation number 1.
Number 1. Okay. Can I bracket that and come back to you once we've resolved this placement of the point about repeated reliance and
Yes,
hollowing out?
definitely.
Yeah. Okay, we'll come back to that. Thank you. We've got two possibilities here. We can take a vote, or people can weigh in.
Maybe you'll take some comfort, Carrie, in knowing that this part of the recommendation, I am sure, will occasion significant debate at the plenary session.
Certainly. All right, so Jeff, you're next.
I just like to weigh in favor of actually making it the new recommendation number 5.
Okay. All right, let's I think we have different perspectives on this among the committee. So I think we might want to just see if we have others who agree with you, Jeff, or others who would go along the lines with what Jerry has been saying. Why don't we make sure that before we vote on this, where it should go as a separate recommendation or into the preamble, we are clear about the wording. I would, at least on number, if we're going to do this as an additional recommendation, probably remove the word also. Okay, and we could entertain if there's any other comments about wording. Otherwise, then we can just go to a vote. Jerry?
Well, just a little wordsmithing, Carrie. It seems to me in-house capacities in order to maintain necessary career staff doesn't read quite right. Perhaps in-house capacities, in particular, their ability to maintain.
Okay, and we can make the parallel change up above as well. Thank you.
And just a final comment on placement. I'm sympathetic to Sally's point that they may not be able to do anything about this. As a consequence, I think in favor of leaving it in the preamble rather than making it a specific recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Peter, you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, just a quick note. I am partial to the separate recommendation, and going to Sally's point, I don't think it's necessarily just additional employees, additional FTEs and Fed parlance, but I also think it's maintaining the skill set. That's why I think that last part, staff with appropriate skills, is important. An agency might say, we don't have enough money to hire 5 folks to work on rulemaking, but they may also say, as we develop staff, think about career, workforce succession planning, do we have folks who have the right training? So I do think it is a helpful recommendation. Again, it's not necessarily putting it in 5 as agencies should consider evaluating the effects. I think that's helpful because agencies do have control on their employee development. So for what it's worth, I think having in 5 framed up that way makes a lot of sense, at least from my perspective.
Okay. Looking at this a little bit more, by the way, I would say if the preamble is the route to go, I'm not sure we need include evaluating. Those considerations might include the effects. I think would be sufficient. And obviously anybody should weigh in if you feel differently. I think on the other hand, it sounds like number 5, it is calling for an actual evaluation of some sort. So I could see that being appropriate for a separate recommendation. Back to you, Sally.
I agree, Carrie, that if it's in the preamble, it doesn't need consider the effects. and if it's here, if it's in the recommendation, it should. The question that I wanted to address, and I wish Paul Verkyle were around at this point, who's done an enormous amount of work on contracting out, is if you want to get the right skill sets and you're living in a world where you're contracting out, the skill set is managing contractors. That's the skill set you need. It's not writing notices of proposed rulemaking or evaluating comments or writing a reason and basis statement. It's being a manager. That's the skill set. So I'm not sure, speaking about skill sets, at the same time you're talking about losing personnel is the right mix. Again, I'm late to the party, and maybe you guys have been through this 3,000 times, but I honestly believe we're talking about something that's very different from using agency people to do rulemaking.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're not late to the party on this one. This is a, as Kevin had said, this is a, new suggestion this time. We've not considered this particular type of addition to this. So all is fair. Are there any other comments on this? Otherwise, I think we should just take a vote. And I think there's probably, a vote to be had between the preamble versus the separate recommendation. I guess there's a preliminary vote, maybe, as whether we need to add anything at all. And then if we do, where should it go? All right, any other comments, questions on wording or anything else? All right, well, why don't we just see if there's, we've got two parallel, very similar kinds of additions. The placement is obviously, I think, the biggest difference between them. Let's just see on the committee here, if we take a vote and see if we need to add either of these, and then if we feel like we want to add one or the other, then we'll vote between the two.
It could be both.
That's true. That's true. So let's see if it's first whether anything should be added along these lines. Okay, so all of those in favor of adding something, whether it's either or both, as Jeff suggests. So raise your hand if you want to add something. I see 4 votes, 5 votes for adding something. Okay. And then all those who would oppose adding anything, again, whether it's one or the other or both. I see 6 hands up voting no. So I think then the placement issue, we don't even get to it.
Were you counting the system's formal raise hands? Or
Yes, I
people with their
was.
hand in the-
The Zoom hands, yes.
I didn't vote because I didn't catch which you were doing.
Okay. All right, well, let's make that clear now. We'll remove your everybody take your Zoom hands down. Does anybody have any questions about how to use the Zoom hand function? And here we're just asking committee members only. Okay. How many would favor making some kind of addition along these lines? Please raise your Zoom hand. Okay. I see then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Zoom hands up. Is there anybody who is having trouble raising your Zoom hand at all? Okay, so 7 raised Zoom hands for adding something. Okay, you can take those hands down. And now those who would vote no, that is, we should not add anything along these lines. Please raise your Zoom hands. Okay, so is there anybody who's had trouble raising your Zoom hand at all for this one, for voting no? All right, so there was 6 no's, 7 yeses. So we go to figuring out now where to insert. Let's take the both first. A choice between either or between both. Okay, so that is, do you think it needs both? Raise your hand, Zoom hand, yes. Or if you think it needs one or the other, we don't know which one it is, doesn't matter. Is anybody in favor of both? Raise your Zoom hand. Okay, I'm going to assume then the others who wanted to add something don't want to add both, but want to add either. And then we can vote now on whether, since we want to add something, whether we add what is indicated in brackets in the preamble, that'll be the first choice, or whether we add something that's a new recommendation number 5, as indicated in the brackets there, line 80 to 82. Any questions before we proceed with that vote? Okay, so raise your Zoom hands if you favor putting this into the preamble. Okay, is there anyone who is having trouble with getting your Zoom hand up for the preamble? Okay, so I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hands for the preamble. And you could take your hands down now. And how many would favor this being added as a separate recommendation number 5 as indicated? And I see 3 hands for that. Is there anybody who's having any trouble getting your hands raised? 4 hands. Anybody? Okay, I see then that we will add it to the preamble. That's what had the greater number of votes. So Kasia, you could delete it as at line 80 to 82, return those numbers, and then delete the brackets on lines 41 to 43. Okay, thank you, Kevin, for raising this, and thank you all for the thoughtful discussion around the suggestion. Are there any other?
Sorry to interrupt you. Want me to just go ahead and accept this change?
Yes, I think we deem that accepted. Obviously, subject to a vote on the all of this is subject to a vote on the overall draft recommendation. Any other comments? I know, Deborah, you had something on recommendation 1 that you wanted to raise. I'm happy to entertain your comment now.
I'd just like to make recommendation 1 less specific, because I think it may be inappropriate to have agencies that don't use contractors at all in rulemaking make this disclosure.
And is it the publication aspect of this that is of particular concern?
Yes, I'm anticipating that an agency that doesn't use contractors at all in rulemaking may just generate controversy by putting a notice on the website saying, we don't use contractors in rulemaking, and leading people to say, whoa, is this a good thing or a bad thing, and so forth.
I see. So so it's really more the putting it on the website. So, I mean, something like agencies should adopt and consider publishing written policies. That would that be more in keeping with what your concerns are?
I think something about should consider adopting and publishing would be more
Okay.
along the lines that I had.
Okay. All right. So why don't we just put that in for everybody on the committee to see, Deborah's suggestion. Kasia, so on line 52, agency should consider adopting and publishing would be the suggestion. Any comments? I know, Jeff, you had your hand up earlier, I think for another matter. I'll come back to you if you, Kevin?
I wonder if it would accomplish the same goals, which is to say, to the extent agencies use contractors at the very beginning, they should adopt, because it would be nice to kind of continue to register if you do use them, that you should adopt. That's a stronger recommendation, but also would allow a kind of carving out so that every agencies that don't use contractors don't have to put a separate statement as a last comment made. So if, yes, something along those lines.
Deborah, would that meet your concern?
I'm sorry, I had a hard time understanding what was said.
Okay, it's simply saying that if you don't use contractors, this doesn't apply. But if you do use contractors, then you should actually adopt and publish written policies.
That sounds good.
Okay, and maybe Kasia, you can say at that point where your cursor is, written policies related to such use.
Out, correct?
Pardon me?
The word consider comes out if it's
Yes,
qualified.
yes. Yeah, we're getting there. Yep.
Oh, I'm
And
sorry.
Yep, take out, consider, and adopt, right. Okay, so that's, Kevin, that reflects what you were suggesting? Any comments on, any further comments?
This may be a matter of happy versus glad, but I suggest starting the sentence alternatively, agencies that use contractors.
Okay. I like that, and I think it accomplishes the same thing.
Get rid of
And then you don't need the they and the comma after functions. Okay. Any other comments, concerns? Any objections to going forward with accepting that? Okay, so Kasia, I think you could accept that change then, hearing no objections. Other questions or comments? Jeff, back to you.
Yeah, I've just got a few little nitpicks. So in footnote 1, we cite the recommendation 85-2, but I think it might be useful to say paragraph 6, since it's a pretty long recommendation and the only part that's relevant is paragraph 6.
Okay.
And you may, I don't know if that's the right Federal Register page for paragraph 6. We might need to check that. On footnote 4, there's a little bit of a spacing issue. In footnote 4, there's the, with a bracket after the word analyses, there should be a space and then no space.
So I added the space as part of the bracket because it is being added from the quote.
Then you need a space before the bracket, don't you?
No, because there's a space after the bracket before feasibility. So I could do it either way. I could-
All right.
Well,
I could
we'll-
keep the
we'll-
space and
we
then
can
add the
deal-
space
It looked
after.
awkward to me.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll
We can
deal with
fix
that in the
that.
matter of style. Yeah.
Okay. And in recommendation 1E, this is also, maybe I'm being too picky, but where it says ethical rules applicable to government contractors, maybe the word such needs to be put in there, applicable to such government contractors.
Sure.
I know that the opening part of 1 limits it, but just seems like, if you just read E, you would think that they had to write ethical rules applicable to all their contractors.
Do we even need the word government there? I mean, we've not used it above. I mean,
Maybe not,
you know,
no. Okay, and then
okay.
recommendation 3, I just read the last line as whether they should be provided with agency email addresses. That sounds like, they want to be able to get in touch with agency people, so they need their email addresses. But I think maybe with their own agency
With their
email
own,
addresses, or
okay.
with agency
Yeah.
email addresses that they can use, or something like. It's just
I think their own makes that much clearer. That's the
Okay.
intention, right?
okay. And then in number 6, where it talks about personal conflict of interest by a covered employee, it could be read to mean, the government employee. So I would say a covered employee of the contractor.
Of the contractor. Okay.
And
Okay.
the last one is not really of the same ilk. It's number 10, and I'm just wondering whether we can just say OMB should assess rather than consider assessing. But
That would probably, let's bracket that one for a moment.
okay.
Because I think up until this point, everything's really been more in the style
Exactly.
category. And I want to just see if everybody else on the committee agrees. We can go over those other ones. If you have any questions, let's just go back and we'll accept them one by one. Are there any objections to accepting all of Jeff's
Nitpicks.
style suggestions before we get to the change in that he's flagged for us to discuss about recommendation 10? Sally, you have your hand up. Any of
I do,
those
and I
fly
don't
specs?
I don't object to anything that Jeff has said, but I'm now focusing on 3. And I'm wondering, are we giving any guidance or leaving it completely up to them? And whether they should provide these contractors with their own email addresses? I mean, don't we think that's wrong? I would think we would think that was wrong because it does create the impression that they work at the agency. It's going to be a .gov if they get their own email addresses. And if it's .gov, it creates the impression that they're a government employee. If I'm missing something, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But I think we should frown on such activities personally.
Okay, let's come back to that one too. Are there any other comments on Jeff's, as he called it, nitpicks, but his helpful corrections and style suggestions, other than what's in recommendation 3 and other than what he mentioned about recommendation 10? Any other comments? Okay, Kasia, let's just accept those other ones then. And then we'll pick up this thread at first about recommendation 3 that Sally has mentioned. And Rachel, did you have a comment you wanted to offer on
I was just
on,
responding to Sally, so I can wait.
Yeah, we will turn to you next then. Okay. Kasia, everything's been accepted. Let's highlight their own because that's still before us. Whether we should even have in recommendation 3 any. Okay, so Sally is asked whether we should give more direction there.
Yeah, and I mean, I would add, again, I'm late to the party and I'm sorry. But how and to what extent they may participate in meeting with agency leadership or other meetings in which substantive policy is decided. Don't we want to discourage that, or at least say that that should occur only to the extent necessary to their doing their job or fulfilling their obligations? I mean, it just sounds to me like the first sentence, which is the right thought, is they should ensure that agency employees can identify contractors and are aware of contractors' assigned functions. What's the public as well? But even assuming that it's the public as well as the agency, their agency colleagues, one would think they'd want to keep these interactions with leadership and with outsiders to a minimum, to only that which is absolutely necessary. I think I've made my views clear. I'm sorry.
Sure. I mean, I'll let Rachel respond. I mean, there may be particular IT security matters or something where they feel like having agencies, the contractor have an agency email address for purpose of working on a rulemaking allows any deliberations to be kept on the agency server, perhaps. So there may be a good faith rationale perhaps for that. Rachel?
I was going to say, this is a pretty widespread practice for agencies to have contractors assigned email addresses. Not all agencies allow it, but some agencies do. And sometimes they have additional policies that say that your email extension is like .ctr, whatever the agency is, .gov. And some agencies require contractors to have their email signature disclose that they're a contractor. So there is additional steps agencies can take. This is, like I said, not just specific to rulemaking. Lots of agencies have contractors using email with their .gov so that they can correspond. And a lot of people we spoke with thought this was a best practice. We flagged it in the report, and our initial thinking about these recommendations was really that it's something where there's not a lot of consistency necessarily in all agencies and how they approach which meetings do our contractors come to, who has an email address and who doesn't get an email address as a contractor. So we wanted them to have these conversations. So when Bridget and I were originally talking about this, to say, well, okay, here's a set of policies we think are a good idea in advance so that it just doesn't haphazardly emerge what meetings can I go to that one? Sure. There's something more systematic, there's more structural and systematic thinking about that. So I just wanted to provide that context and background.
Okay. Others have any other reactions or comments to the point about email addresses or anything else in recommendation 3? Jeff, you have your hand up still. Is there any other?
Well, I just wanted to echo what Rachel just said. If you look at the report on, I guess it's on page 44, the authors, she and Bridget say, assigning contractors government email addresses is another way that agencies integrate contractors into rulemaking. A contractor noted that having an email address not only helped them to coordinate with agency officials, but it also helped them feel a part of the agency's team. So it's treated as a positive, Sally. Now I understand your objection that it might be sort of misleading or give the wrong impression to people who might think that they are an agency employee. But the report also indicates that some agencies require the contractor to disclose their affiliation in their email signature, or had a specific extension that denoted contractor status. So there are different ways of handling this.
Well, I guess I would say, I'm sorry, Carrie.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
I guess I would say, I don't think it's positive, and I think it is confusing to people. But if it is a positive, and if agencies do it, then the actions that Rachel and Bridget cite about having contractor in the email address or other protections, I think we should encourage, not just leave it open and say whether or not they should have an email address. It would be an email address that designates them as a contractor.
And Jerry, you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, Carrie, I mean, I'm sympathetic to Sally's view that we ought to say something a little stronger. On the other hand, although the report is path-breaking in terms of the amount of information that we now have that we didn't have before, the sample size is very small. And I'm not sure that we have enough understanding of what the practices are to make some sort of stronger recommendation here.
Elena?
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of echoing what was just said, but I just wanted to also point out that, I think there's sort of two types of contractors that get used. One is sort of they work there on a day-to-day basis. We use a lot of contractors for administrative support type activities in rulemaking, and that we do indicate in signature lines and so forth, and their name, that they're a contractor. And then there's different contractors that you contract out for a particular, maybe say a piece of research to support a rulemaking activity, and you wouldn't probably give them their own email address. So I think saying something like whether they should be provided is important because there's different circumstances at play. And I think that's consistent with what Rachel was saying earlier as well.
Okay, so I mean, I could imagine a possible ways to address this. One would be to add a sentence after this to say if contractors are given their own email address, agent, something happens, or it could be the agency should ensure that they should identify in all email communications, or just identify themselves in their email communication. Yeah. I mean, another possibility could be simply to change whether they should be provided with. It could be how they should identify themselves in those circumstances where it is necessary to provide them with their own agency email addresses. That could be another option.
Yeah.
Sally, do you want to weigh in on anything along these lines? Do you think this is addressing your concern?
I would just say, and if they are provided, this would be at line 73, and if they are provided with their own agency email addresses, it should clearly identify them as contractors.
There's not a singular noun though. What does it refer to there?
They should be identified. They should clearly be identified as contractors.
Okay, yeah. And if they are provided with their own, they should clearly be identified as. And my only suggestion for a
Maybe-
separate sentence was simply that it's getting to be a fairly long sentence, but we can deal with that too. Jeff?
Can we hear from Rachel as to how the agencies that have done this are, identified their contractors in the email, how they do it? I mean, does it just say parentheses contractor, or how exactly do they do it? I'm only thinking of when I was sort of serving as a part-time contractor research director for ACUS a couple days a week. I was given an email address and it didn't say contractor. So, but I'm not opposed to this. I just wonder how it's been done before.
So what we saw and what I've seen just generally looking around, and maybe some of the agency personnel on the call want to talk about their agencies, but is like at DoD, which is the largest service contractor, they have .contractor.mil and as their extension, right? And so that is all, I believe all contractors, not all agencies, I think have that extension .ctr in. And so I don't know the IT reasons why you would or would not do that. And then some agencies did tell us that they have some sort of, I think there must be a policy at my agency because I always note the signature line says that someone's a contractor, but we did not obtain any of those policies. And those would be, I presume, IT policies for the agency rather than anything dealing with rulemaking.
Okay. So I think there might be, as with other aspects of this recommendation, need to be cognizant of the fact that there are different levels and different kind of character to the relationship between contractors and government employees when it comes to rulemaking across different agencies. Some agencies might have contractors regularly, others might be a one-off situation. And what may work for the Defense Department does not necessarily work for everybody else. But what we have here, right? Go ahead, Sally.
Can I ask the committee on style to maybe come up with go back to the way it was originally, and whether or not, I guess they had, and whether they would have their own email addresses. And then just say in all such instances, because there's a bunch of them in here where they sit, who they meet with, and how they communicate. In all such instances, efforts should be made to be clear when an individual is a contractor as opposed to an agency employee. I don't have the words, but I think, Carrie, you're right. The sentence is going on forever and we don't need that. And there are all sorts of instances. You go to a meeting and you see somebody and you think they're an agency person. It should be made probably clear that they may not be if they are not. And that's whether or not you think it's good or bad. They can be part of the team, but let's wear a little label that says contractor.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, I agree with you, Sally. The first sentence is serving that, and it does say that, but it couldn't hurt to end the paragraph by reiterating it.
I think the committee may be, or our authors may be divided on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. It is a necessary thing now, that's for sure. But the fact that it's necessary, I think we ought to be more transparent with the public in rulemaking, which is a participatory activity. They ought to know who they're dealing with.
Right. Well, there are other aspects of this that deal with transparency, recommendations 8 and 9, and those are geared more toward the public. Here, recommendation 3 is it says, agencies should ensure that agency employees can identify contractors and are aware of contractors' assigned functions. And then it's within the context of that global recommendation there that the second sentence is indicating issues that may need to be attended to in ensuring that agency employees can identify contractors at meetings, in emails, and so forth. But I don't see how it can hurt to add that additional sentence at the end. I mean, it could, what if we said in all such instances, I don't know if this helps contract, any contracting, any employees of the contractor shall have their contracting status identified. I don't know if that gets better or worse.
I had forgotten about 8 and 9, to be honest. If it's all right with everybody, I've made my point. Let's just go back to the way it was, and I'll just be a curmudgeon.
Okay.
Should
Unless
it be activities rather than instances?
Well, again, this is putting an exclamation point on what's the first sentence, I think, but which is fine. How does that look? Anybody have any other suggestions or questions, comments, or objections on adding this additional sentence? Jerry?
Maybe we could charge the Committee on Style with deciding whether this is redundant.
I agree.
Now, also,
Okay.
Carrie,
Yeah.
any employees of the contractor, it might be just a single person who's the contractor.
Right. I'm of the view that it is stated in the first sentence already, but open to. So if I'm on the Committee of Style, that's what my view would be. Lay that out. But you can feel free to speak up in anybody for this or some other permutation of this. David?
It seems to me that that first sentence of number 3 has not been altered at all. And with that present, Sally still delivered her comments on this whole situation. That alone tells me the first sentence is not sufficient. And I would favor adding a sentence, but the issue at the end is not their role identified, but their contractor status. So I'd suggest amending the last sentence, the proposed last sentence, to say, in all such activities, any contract employees shall have their contractor status identified. And also saying contract employees makes it clear that we're talking about a single contractor or employees of the corporate contractor.
Any questions or other comments on the addition of the sentence? Lon?
Well, I'm okay with the addition of that, but I think Sally had a comment about to the extent that they deal with the public ought to know that too. I think the first sentence simply says that they should ensure that agency employees can identify contractors. So I'm not sure it addresses everything she said.
Well, that's why I referenced, and I appreciate the support, Lon, but that's why I referenced 8 and 9 on transparency, which seems to go to the public. Why I think at this point, we've spent enough time not getting anywhere. So why don't I withdraw and go back to 3, which is agency only. And if they're confused as to who their colleagues are, we're really in a great state.
Would it help, Sally, to just add and maybe address David's comment to delete the second, that additional sentence, but instead maybe add a preliminary clause to the second, what is the second sentence in number 3 that would say to
ensure that their role, well, no.
To promote
what do they-
transparency about contractors' status, agencies may address whether,
What, when you say agencies may address, what is it exactly you want them to do? And maybe that's the way to get at it, whatever the it is.
what if it may address in their policies? Their policies are referred to in 1.
Okay. Written policies. Okay.
And there is, already an indication, perhaps some redundancy, but that's fine.
Is it, oh, here we go back to the, is it may address or should address?
I think the reason the may is simply, it could be should consider addressing. The reason not is sometimes some of the considerations might not even be applicable to a given agency. I think that's why it's may address, to give agencies more flexibility and not apply because there's so much, there could potentially so much variation across the agencies and how they use contractors.
Okay. Then you could delete the last sentence
Okay.
and we can move on. And I'm sorry.
Okay, it's fine. Unless you have now generated any support for the last sentence that people want to come in its defense, but I appreciate that, Sally. Jerry, you're next.
No, I'm not supporting the last sentence, but if we add in their policies, it begins to look like this actually should be a subpart of 1 rather than 3. But
In a perfect world, Jerry, I wouldn't disagree with you. Query whether whether that's already there. I mean, should we just simply move what is that second sentence to 1D? I mean, maybe it may be it doesn't go into policies, but it needs to be part of their practices.
I think
Maybe
that's the case, because I don't think agencies are going to want to write down policies for each of these
right
things. Because
what if we change it to policies or practices? And now it doesn't necessarily have to be in, it could be in their policies. What do you think, Jerry?
that's fine.
Okay.
By me.
Any other comments about number 3? Any objections to it reading as it reads now, accepting the tracked changes? David?
Well, having cited Sally's bringing up the entire issue as evidence that the first sentence of 3 was insufficient, I've lost track of why Sally was agreeable to taking it out.
Well,
Sally is
Sally would be
eminently-
best to respond to that.
Sally is eminently reasonable and saw no growing support for my position. And I mean, I find this paragraph bizarre. Agencies may address, and before we put it in their policies. But it also made it sound like having these contractors around, whether or not they were identified, although 8 and 9 sort of says the public should be told, just seemed to me the wrong thing. And nobody seemed to bite at that little bait. So as a realist, I thought we should move on. But thank you, David.
Okay, any other comments? And last opportunity to bite at Sally's suggestion here.
Just carry one thing. I guess this can be left for the plenary session, but somebody is going to object to the use of may as if it's signaling permission to agencies that ACUS is conferring, but I don't want to push that point.
What if we just made it? Would it sound better to say agencies should consider addressing in their policies and practices?
Won't Alan Morrison object to that?
Objects to everything.
Should we be writing anything if our main goal is to avoid an objection in the plenary?
All right.
I mean, I do think it is odd to say may, but you know, so does that sound a little bit better?
Harry, I'm just trying to save you some time at the plenary session.
Sure. Sure.
One
Jerry.
possibility is to start that sentence as just saying, agencies should carefully consider whether contractors, et cetera. Take all this policies and practices language out.
Doesn't that imply that they're not going to, when they do the other considers, they're not going to be careful about it? Number 4, for example.
Just
Take out
an
careful
emphasis, a point of emphasis there, Jeff.
Agencies should specifically focus on whether.
Okay.
That's better.
Will that help us at the plenary? Matt?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Any other comments on 3 as it's tracked? Are there any other comments or objections or questions or suggested changes? Otherwise, if there are none, then we should consider number 3, all those changes accepted, and we'll move on. Jeff had a point about number 10, but we should take a break because we're at a midpoint here if we're going to go to 3 hours. If the committee, I'm open to input if people think we're close to just plowing through, but if we want to extend this to the full 3 hours, this would be a natural breaking point.
I don't feel strongly about 10, but maybe we can get through that one quickly.
Okay, let's see if we can get through 10 and see if there's any other and here is you were just wondering about whether we should change it from should consider to should assess. Should
Yes.
consider assessing or should assess. Anybody have any? Jeff doesn't feel very strongly about it, he says now. So what would does anybody feel strongly that this should be changed to should assess from should consider assessing?
I wish we had our OMB representative here. Although I acknowledge that, Bridget sure knows OMB inside out and backwards, but who at OMB? I mean,
Well,
Sorry to interrupt.
Sally, which do you
Stephanie,
think OMB would prefer? I mean, I would think the OMB would be more supportive of the should consider assessing.
I think we actually did ask for that specific language. This is stuff taken from OMB in our last committee meeting, and I apologize that I had to duck out for a bit. We were more
Welcome back.
supportive of should consider. In terms of who would be doing the assessment, it would be a function probably combined between OIRA and our procurement office. Unfortunately, I still haven't received any affirmative feedback from our procurement office on this suggestion, which is, I guess, better than clear opposition. And so, for that reason alone, I think I'd tend towards should consider. I continue to try to get that feedback, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to, at a minimum, bring it to plenary. I guess the reason I initially suggested the should consider is because I felt like if implemented, this rule could generate a bunch of materials that would be helpful in this assessment and that could help OMB and others to really understand agency practices. One of the issue is that there's not a lot of information out there at present beyond the wonderful report from our consultants. And so, that was sort of my initial thinking in making that suggestion.
I just noticed that there's a consider in the second line too, so don't know if we need both of them.
Okay, why don't we delete the second one and reinstall the original in the first? I agree that the second consider is redundant. Would you have any objections to that stuff?
Sounds good.
Okay, anybody else want to weigh in on the number 10 as it's currently displayed? Okay, hearing no other comments, number 10, then accept those track changes. Are there any other changes, edits, questions, concerns about any other aspects of the preamble or any of the 10 recommendation paragraphs? Okay, then I think it's appropriate for somebody, if you'd like, to make a motion and we can vote on whether to approve this. Do we have a vote, a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, are there, now that the motion is properly before us, any further debate or comments before we vote? Okay, hearing none, let me just remind everyone that it's just committee members who can vote, and that can be obviously a designated alternate for a committee member, but just committee members or their designated alternates can vote. We will vote using Zoom's raise hand function. If you cannot activate that, maybe you're on the phone or your system doesn't seem to have it or whatever, holler out or put something in the chat. But the preference here is to use your Zoom raise hand function. And with that, then, is there anybody have any questions about whether they are a member of the committee or not? Okay, so all those committee members in favor of the motion to approve the recommendation as you have before it, subject only to the minor committee on style changes like with the citations and so forth. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And Kasia, are you going to take the vote on this?
I suppose I can.
Or let's see, I 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 ayes. And then you can take your hands down. Okay, and then raise your hand if you vote no on this draft recommendation going forward to the plenary.
So Carrie, you didn't vote?
I did not vote. No, I don't. I'm not sure I'm needed to vote. But I would, if I were to vote, I would vote yes. Okay. And seeing no hands raised for the no, are there any abstentions? So the vote is 11, 0, and 1 abstention. With that, our work as a committee is officially sort of drawing to a close on this recommendation. I want to thank all of the committee members for your very thoughtful discussion at each of our meetings. Obviously, want to give a tremendous thanks to our consultants for their terrific report. And most of all, our exceptional ACUS staff, Kasia in particular, who's helped us move this along really very well. I'd like to urge everyone to come out and attend the plenary. My understanding is there's options to participate virtually as well as in person. And we will look forward to seeing you there, and you'll have an opportunity certainly to raise any comments at that time if you have further comments on this. Let me invite any other questions or comments that anybody may have before we formally draw to a close.
Once again, Carrie has ably led us.
Thank you very much, Sally.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Matt, do you have any closing words for us at all?
Oh, just to echo what the compliment that Sally just offered you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Well, then we'll see everybody, I hope, at the plenary, if not even before then in some other fashion. But thank you again to all involved on the committee, Rachel, and please extend our thanks to Bridget as well, who couldn't be here today. And this concludes our meeting, and be safe, be well.